how avoidants really feel when you go no contact. So let's talk about something most people think they understand, but rarely do. When you go no contact with someone who has an avoidant attachment style, there's this common belief that they just don't care. They're out there partying, posting, living their best life. But here's the truth. It's not that simple. Avoidants aren't emotionally absent. They're emotionally protected. They've built walls, not because they don't want love, but because they're terrified of needing it. So when you go no contact, you're not just disappearing, you're disrupting the control they thought they had over their emotional world. At first, they may feel relief, not because they never cared, but because they feared closeness and your presence pushed them past their comfort zone. So space, it feels like safety. But here's what happens over time. When you're really gone, not chasing, not proving, not waiting, they start to feel the emptiness they've spent their whole life trying to outrun. That silence, it becomes loud. That space, it becomes hollow. And the person they once thought they didn't need suddenly becomes the person they can't stop thinking about. But don't mistake regret for readiness. Just because they feel your absence doesn't mean they're ready to show up with presence. Going no contact isn't a punishment. It's a boundary. It's you saying, I love you, but I love me more. And sometimes that's what it takes for someone to realize their distance wasn't power, it was a shield they used to avoid healing. So if you're wondering how the avoidant feels after you stop reaching out, know this, they feel it deeply, but feeling it and being capable of doing something about it, two very different things. People often misunderstand avoidantly attached individuals as cold, emotionless, or simply uninterested, but that's far from the truth. At their core, avoidants are just as capable of deep emotional connection and vulnerability as anyone else. The difference lies in how they've learned to handle emotional closeness. Typically, their past experiences have taught them that intimacy comes with risk of rejection, engulfment, or emotional pain. So instead of leaning in, they pull away. This isn't because they don't feel, it's because they've learned that feeling too much can be overwhelming or even unsafe. When someone with an avoidant attachment style seems distant or unbothered, what's often happening internally is much more complex. They may genuinely care, even love deeply, but they express it in a way that keeps them protected. Vulnerability feels threatening to them, so instead of expressing need or affection directly, they may shut down or create space. It's a defense mechanism, not an absence of feeling. The emotional wall they build isn't a reflection of their heart being empty. It's a sign that their heart has been hurt, and this is how they cope. So when you go no contact with an avoidant, people assume it won't affect them, that they'll just move on without a second thought. But what's really happening is this: the silence gives them the emotional distance they're used to, yes, but it also gives them time to feel something they often try to avoid: loss. In the absence of contact, they don't immediately reach out, not because they don't care, but because doing so requires a level of emotional vulnerability they're not equipped to handle easily. It takes them longer to process those emotions. It's like their feelings are stored in a locked room, and when you go no contact, it's the first time in a long time that door even starts to creak open. That's why it's such a misconception to think they don't care. They care, but their care doesn't look like the kind you're used to. It's quieter, more internal, delayed in its expression. They might feel the pull to reach out, miss you deeply, even regret pushing you away, but the fear of re-engaging and risking emotional exposure often keeps them frozen. The wall stays up, even when the heart behind it aches. So while it may appear like they're unbothered, what they're really doing is surviving in the only way they've learned, by staying protected even if that protection costs them connection. When someone goes no contact with an avoidantly attached person, the initial reaction from the avoidant is often misunderstood. On the surface, it can look like relief, like they're finally getting the space they've always wanted. And in some ways, that's true. Avoidants often feel overwhelmed by emotional closeness. Even when it's with someone they care about, the pressure to emotionally engage, to be vulnerable, to commit at a deeper level, it can feel like too much. So when contact stops and the emotional demands drop to zero, there's a temporary sense of calm. They might even feel like things are finally back under control. But that calm is deceptive. What's really happening is more like a pause than a resolution. In the early stages of no contact, the avoidant may rationalize your absence. They'll tell themselves you were too needy, that things weren't working, that it's better this way. That self-soothing narrative keeps them from having to confront their own role in the disconnection. It's how they maintain emotional distance from themselves as much as from others. This phase can make it seem like they've moved on quickly, like they've emotionally detached without effort, but it's not it's delay. Because underneath that surface level relief is a slow burning emotional process that they're not always even aware of. Avoidants aren't good at identifying their feelings in real time. It takes them longer to register emotional pain, longer to admit that someone's absence actually matters. But over time, the silence starts to echo. The absence becomes real. That person who used to text, check in, reach out, they're not doing it anymore. And the avoidance starts to feel the shift, not right away, but gradually. It might hit them during a quiet evening, during a moment of stress, or when something reminds them of you unexpectedly. And when it does, it's unsettling. The emotional flood doesn't come all at once. It trickles in: regret, longing, confusion. They begin to notice what's missing, but now there's no buffer, no messages, no reassurances, no signs that you're still there waiting. This is where the avoidant faces something they've been trying to outrun: emotional consequence. Your absence becomes undeniable. And while they may not express it outwardly, the inner experience is real. It just doesn't come with dramatic gestures or obvious responses. It comes with late realizations and internal tension. So while the early stage of no contact might look like peace for them, it's often just the beginning of emotional clarity they didn't know they needed and weren't prepared to handle. When you truly go no contact with an avoidantly attached person, you create a space that forces them to confront something they've spent much of their life avoiding: the emptiness that comes with genuine absence. Avoidants are skilled at maintaining distance, keeping people at arm's length so they don't have to face uncomfortable emotions. Their emotional world often feels safer when it's controlled and predictable, even if that means feeling disconnected. But no contact removes that control in a way that texting, calling, or even arguing never could. It exposes a silence that they can't fill with distractions or defenses. At first, this silence may feel like relief or even indifference on their part because it's familiar territory, their default comfort zone. However, the longer the no contact lasts, the more the quiet space begins to feel vast and undeniable. This is the moment when the emotional walls they built to protect themselves start to feel less like shields and more like prisons. The absence isn't just a lack of communication anymore. It becomes a presence in itself, a reminder of what they lost or might lose. The empty space echoes with memories, what ifs, and feelings that were suppressed or ignored. For avoidants who typically suppress or minimize their feelings to maintain control, this kind of emptiness is jarring. It's not just missing someone. It's missing the idea of connection they buried beneath their defenses. The very thing they told themselves they didn't need or want starts to take on a different shape inside their mind. That absence begins to crystallize into something real and painful. even if they don't admit it openly. It challenges their narrative that they are self-sufficient and unaffected by loss. This emptiness is unfamiliar and uncomfortable, and avoidants often struggle with it because it demands an emotional response they aren't used to giving. It asks them to feel vulnerability and longing, emotions they've trained themselves to avoid. The silence forces introspection, but it can also lead to confusion or frustration. They may question why the distance feels so heavy or why the void is so difficult to fill, because unlike the reactive closeness they might engage in when things feel safe, this kind of absence requires patience and emotional courage, qualities that avoidants haven't typically developed. In this way, no contact doesn't just remove you from their life, it creates a mirror for their own emotional state. The quiet space you leave behind isn't empty to them. It's full of unanswered feelings and unresolved tensions. It's the absence of your presence that makes the distance real. And that's when the avoidant begins to realize the true weight of what they lost, even if they don't immediately act on it. Feeling regret after you go no contact with an avoidantly attached person is a complex and often misunderstood experience. It's tempting to assume that once they realize what they've lost, they'll immediately want to come back, reach out, or change their behavior. But the truth is, regret and readiness are two very different things, especially for someone with avoidant tendencies. Regret can exist quietly beneath the surface without translating into action, because acting on those feelings requires a vulnerability they are often not prepared to face. Avoidantly attached individuals have spent much of their lives protecting themselves from emotional exposure. They've built emotional walls not just to keep others out, but to keep their own fears and insecurities at bay. So when regret surfaces, it often feels confusing or threatening rather than motivating. The feeling might be there. They may find themselves thinking about what could have been or wishing things were different, but the idea of breaking down those walls, of risking vulnerability, can feel overwhelming. This inner conflict creates a hesitation, a pause that keeps them stuck. In many cases, avoidants may try to suppress or rationalize their regret. They might tell themselves they were better off, that the relationship was flawed, or that they're not ready for intimacy. These mental defenses are attempts to avoid the pain of loss and the discomfort of change. Even when regret is real, it can be buried beneath layers of self-protection that prevent them from moving forward in a healthy way. Readiness, on the other hand, means more than just feeling regret. It means being willing to confront those difficult emotions, to be open and present, and to make changes, even if that means risking pain or rejection again. For avoidance, readiness requires breaking long-held patterns of avoidance and defense, which is no small feat. It often takes time, reflection, and sometimes external support for them to reach a place where they can move from regret into action. This is why it's common to see avoidantly attached people vacillate. They might reach out one day, then pull back the next. Their emotional process is gradual, not linear. They may feel regret, but remain unready to fully engage or commit to change. This disconnect between feeling and readiness can be frustrating for those on the receiving end who might interpret the hesitation as indifference or manipulation. Understanding that regret doesn't automatically mean readiness can help shift expectations and give space for genuine healing to take place. It's a slow process for avoidance to move beyond regret, and it often requires patience and self-awareness for them to eventually be willing to show up with presence rather than just feeling the absence. No contact is often misunderstood as a tactic designed to manipulate or punish someone, but in reality, it's a powerful boundary rooted in self-respect and emotional health. When you decide to go no contact, especially with someone who has an avoidant attachment style, it's not about playing games or trying to make them chase you. Instead, it's about reclaiming your own power and setting limits on how you allow others to treat you. Avoidants tend to thrive in environments where emotional distance is the norm, so no contact disrupts that pattern by clearly communicating that your well-being matters more than maintaining a one-sided connection. This boundary sends a message not to control or provoke, but to protect yourself from being caught in emotional limbo. When you keep reaching out to an avoidant, it can create a cycle of push and pull where your efforts are met with withdrawal. That dynamic can drain your energy, chip away at your self-worth, and leave you feeling invisible or unvalued. No contact is a way of stepping off that exhausting merry-go-round. It's a declaration that your time, feelings, and peace are non-negotiable. It's important to recognize that going no contact is not a form of revenge or punishment, though it may feel that way to the avoidant who suddenly experiences your absence. Instead, it's an act of love for yourself. It's you saying, I am worthy of respect, consistency, and emotional availability. By choosing no contact, you're creating space to heal, reflect, and regain clarity about what you truly need and deserve in a relation. For the avoidant, no contact can feel like a loss of control because it removes their ability to engage on their terms. They're used to managing closeness by keeping people at a distance, but when you pull away completely, it forces a shift in the emotional dynamic. This shift can be uncomfortable for them because it breaks the pattern they rely on to feel safe. But this discomfort is also an opportunity for them to recognize that their distance wasn't strength, their independence, but a defense mechanism that ultimately cost them meaningful connection. When boundaries like no contact are set firmly and respectfully, it can serve as a catalyst for growth, not only for you, but potentially for the avoidant as well. It clarifies what healthy relationship behavior looks like and holds space for both parties to reflect on what they want and need. So rather than seeing no contact as a weapon, it's more accurate to see it as a form of self-care that protects your heart and honors your worth, while also opening the door to authentic healing and transformation. So when you choose to go no contact with someone who is avoidant, remember that their silence isn't always what it seems. Behind the distance, behind the walls, there's often a complicated mix of fear, confusion, and yes, even care. But your no contact is not about waiting for them to change or chase you. It's about honoring your own needs and boundaries. It's about reclaiming your peace and showing up for yourself in a way that no one else can. Thank you for taking the time to listen and reflect on this. If you're navigating a relationship with someone who pulls away, I hope this gives you clarity and strength to trust yourself. Remember, you deserve connection that feels safe, balanced, and real. Take care of your heart first, and everything else will follow. Thank you again for being here. Wishing you courage, healing, and love on your journey ahead. Goodbye for now.